Before we begin, I do want to address the format of this video being, vertical instead of horizontal like you usually do. I apologize if that's annoying, and I don't know if people have like a preference for, vertical or horizontal these days. But I will say that I initially filmed this to do short videos and short updates for a different app where there is, vertical format for the videos. So that's how most of the clips I filmed were. So for continuity's sake, I'm doing it vertical. But going forward, for my videos, I think I'm going to try to do horizontal. That just seems to be more the way here. But anyway, let's get into my tree bed. The idea for the tree bed began a little over a year ago when my children and I had to downsize in a big way. Our living situation changed, and our where we're living is quite a bit smaller. And so I was really looking for ways to conserve on space. So the best way to do that for me was to think vertically. And I figured my bed was a really great way to do that because by having a loft bed, I could then be able to be up high and then use the down below portion either for storage or, like a little reading nook. I ended up using it for both actually. But that was the idea behind it.
Unfortunately, I struggled to find a bed that would fit my needs and budget, so I ultimately decided to make one of my own, starting with this inexpensive, very simple bed frame. Um, Initially, my idea was really simple. I was just going to replace the corner post with something longer, then paint it and embellish it with some flowers, moss, etc., make it very fancy and ornate, as I'm somewhat wont to do. As a note, this drawing was incredibly rough, in part because at this point in the project, I was really lacking in a direction to go with it. I had some kind of vague ideas of what I wanted, but I was really struggling to put it together, and it actually took me a really long time to get started because of that. But good things happened later on. With my very basic plan in mind, I headed off to my favorite lesbian hangout to get some 4x4s. Based on the selection available, I can only assume that the forest where they grow their lumber looks something like this. After allowing the somewhat obnoxiously moist, sorry for that word, wood dry for a couple of weeks in the garage, I got to sanding down the beams to get them smoother and ready for paint. One of my biggest concerns in this initial phase was making sure that I got all the holes drilled straight and at the appropriate height to ensure the pieces would all fit together correctly. I measured more than twice because this was like literally the scariest part, and I was afraid that I'd muck it up before I even really got into the project. And I don't have a lot of tools, so I got this jig inexpensively to help drill my holes nice and straight, and I'm actually pretty impressed with how it worked out. Definitely recommend one of these. At this point, as I was priming the pieces for paint, I thought that I was nearing the home stretch of this project. How very wrong I was, because somewhere around this point, I got a late night text from my bestie suggesting I make this whole project a bit extra, a la our favorite YouTuber, Rachel Maxey, and turn the whole thing into a giant tree. This was, of course, brilliant, so I sketched out a rough design of what I wanted the tree to look like. With the new design in hand, the next step was to actually put the whole bed together to make sure all of the pieces fit correctly. I was really nervous about this because I didn't want to have to re-drill the holes. I did anticipate that being up higher would make the bed less stable, so I had acquired a couple of dressers that I intended to use under the bed, both to utilize storage space and also to attach the bed to the bed frame to help better disperse the weight as well as prevent any movement on what is functionally some stilts. The dressers were white, which I thought would be too stark underneath what would become a brown tree, so I decided to paint them a dark green so it would feel more foresty under the bed. I'm still undecided on how I feel about this color decision. As you'll see at the end, they still feel kind of plain, and I want to decorate them somehow, but I haven't figured that bit out. Anyway, back to the bed. I decided to sculpt the tree out of plaster of Paris. I'd used it in the past for making my tree door, and I really like the textures I can get. But full disclosure, if I were to do this again, I don't think I'd use this material, or I'd maybe do it a little bit differently. Possibly the mix I got wasn't a great quality, or I may not have mixed it properly or let it cure long enough. But after several months of use now, I've found that it cracks pretty easily, and I'm having to make some repairs on it. For the trunks, I started with foil and tape to get the basic shape, and then I began adding layers of plaster of Paris strips. The branches I made with a similar process, starting with some wire, then foil, and then the plaster. At this point, I started to have some concerns about whether the plaster alone would be durable enough, and I layered a couple of branches with Mod Podge and newspaper to see if it would be more durable. Unfortunately, I decided this was taking too long and I was too impatient, um, and I have regrets. I think doing this, at least for the branches, would have provided a lot more durability in the long run. But live and learn. After letting the branches dry, I attached them to the trunks with more tape and plaster. And then for the tops of the trees, I reused the original legs from the bed, then added wire and foil armature for a basic tree limb shape, and then again with the plaster. Because of the magic of film editing, it may not be evident that sculpting the tree took a long time. Over 2 months had already elapsed by the time I'd finished sculpting the branches, and I was starting to get a bit impatient with the process.
Right, so I am making some progress on my bed. It is coming along, well, it's actually coming along probably pretty quickly, but I wasn't intending on doing any of this bit, so it feels like a long time because I want to sleep in my bed. Anyway, here's what we're looking at. This is how we're coming along. I accidentally got some plaster on the back of my phone, so that's why it looks like it's all halo-y. I really need to clean the lens now, but I've got a couple of branches now. I've got some trunks on the trees, and then over here, drying in this box, are what are going to be the finials for the bedpost. They're more branches, so that's what we've got. All right, more to come.
And I soldiered on, adding the finials to the tops by screwing them into the tops of the posts and then filling in with foil and, surprise, more plaster.
Tree bed progress. It's coming along. I have gotten all 4 of the tree tops up onto the tops of the posts. So that is kind of a big thing. Once I've finished putting all the branches on, then it is time to paint. But on that note, I'm feeling like it needs more branches. The idea with all of the branches kind of being curving in like this was that it was going to look kind of like, it was going to be kind of like a canopy, which I still kind of like, but I think it's looking a little bit forced in a way that I don't love. And I think I want to add more branches to the tops here to give it a little bit more of a natural tree sort of look. The problem I'm going to run into is that I still have to be able to fit this thing through a doorway. So I am kind of limited on how many directions I can and how big of branches I can put and have it still like fit once it's disassembled. So I should probably measure some things. But yeah, I think it wants more branches.
It did, in fact, need more branches, and this part I recall being somewhat miserable. It was the end of summer, and if you notice, I'm wearing a mask now. This is because I live in an area prone to wildfires, and it was basically hotter than Satan's butt crack, and the air quality was terrible from all of the smoke. Finally happy with the overall look of the branches, I wanted to start getting it ready for paint. And at this point, I had to disassemble the bed with the help of my bestie, and I was so nervous about this part. I was terrified I was going to drop something and break it.
Okay, I managed to get the bed down in one piece, which is really exciting. I was really terrified I was going to drop one of the one of the posts and break all the branches off, but I didn't. And now we're going to make some plaster mud, basically, and like, let me go wireless here. Basically, what I want to do, like, fill in all of like these little areas where you can see that it's like plaster strips. So basically I'm just gonna like fill those all in with mud, so that it will look more like tree bark. You can kind of see like down here where I've already done it, it's got more of like a more organic sort of texture. So that's what I'm gonna do now. Good soup.
I basically just caressed the mud all over the tree branches, and I'm sorry for whatever visual that may have brought to mind, but that's functionally what it was, just smoothing it all over to cover up all of the creases and cracks and holes, just to give it a much more organic looking texture.
So I'm going to try using some of this stuff on the inside of my trees. It's probably not strictly necessary, but if you look down here on the bottom, you can see there is quite a bit of gap between the original 4x4 that I used as the base and where the foil armature is that I kind of built up. And the foam probably isn't actually going to do much, but I'm just feeling some kind of way about having a big gap in there. So I'm going to go ahead and fill that. And then I'm going to work on sealing the bottom of this so that there isn't like any airflow on the inside and no moisture can get onto the inside. So here we go. Ooh, very gooey. Nice. It does look like it's, filling the spaces. My hope is that it will kind of my hope is that it's just going to kind of fill the gaps and maybe give it a little bit more structural whatever. It is the next day, and the spray foam has done really, really well. It actually expanded way more than I thought it was going to. I didn't realize it was going to expand quite so far out here, but that's okay. That's wonderful, because it did exactly what I wanted it to do, what I had hoped it was going to do, which is give a little bit more stability to this from the inside, so it's less likely to crack and such when if it gets knocked into. So next I need to just kind of remove some of this forbidden cotton candy. And with that, it was finally time to start painting. When I tell you that this felt like such a big milestone, don't tell past me. It was still going to be like 6 more weeks of work. But anyway, I started off using a primer and very quickly realized that it was not going to work. The primer was too wet, and the sculpted plaster basically started melting and losing its structure and cracked really badly as it dried. The solution actually came from the realm of cosplay. I had seen a lot of cosplayers use Plasti Dip to prep their props for paint and decided to give it a try. As a product, it worked wonders, 10 out of 10 recommend. That said, remember how I said I live in a fire-prone area? The Plasti Dip trees looked so much like charred trees that I actually had to step away from the project for a bit to calm my nervous system. But the Plasti Dip was really great, and I was able to use up a bunch of paint I already had and mix up a bunch of different browns and greens to give depth and variation to the trees. At this point, the project began to feel a little bit like a game of and then, where every time I thought I was just about done, I'd remember another little bit that I needed to do. First was adding a bit of fun details to the bed. I used epoxy clay, which I have some very mixed feelings about because of how sticky it is, but I used it to make vines and leaves and little mushrooms and attached them to the bedposts, and then later went back and painted them and added little bits of moss and details. I also painted the slats for the bed to look like a starry sky for anyone who's reading or relaxing in the underbed nook. I used Hemway glitter additive as well for some extra sparkle and shine. This isn't sponsored or anything. I just really like their glitter. And finally, after nearly 4 months of work, it was time to assemble the bed. And here is the reveal.